The dry, hot air, thick with the scent of sun-baked earth and distant eucalyptus, chafed my nostrils. A single, tarnished brass button, embossed with an indecipherable crest, lay half buried in the ochre dust, glinting faintly under the relentless Australian sun. It was April 3, 1848, when Ludwig Leichhardt, a Prussian explorer of considerable renown, dispatched his final communication from the fringes of the Darling Downs in Queensland, before turning his expedition west into the vast, unknown interior. My examination of the expedition's preliminary records, compiled from various colonial archives and Leichhardt's own meticulous correspondence, paints a picture of an undertaking as ambitious as it was heavily provisioned. Dr. Ludwig Leichhardt, a man of intense scientific curiosity and an unyielding will, had already earned a reputation for successful, albeit often arduous, explorations of the Australian continent. His 1844-45 journey from Moreton Bay to Port Essington, a 3,000-mile traverse, had cemented his name in the annals of discovery, despite the considerable suffering endured by his party. This new endeavour, however, dwarfed his previous achievements in scope. The objective was nothing less than a monumental east-to-west crossing, from the fertile plains of Queensland to the Swan River settlement on the distant western coast, a journey of some 2,500 miles through territory entirely unmapped and largely unknown to Europeans. The expedition, which departed McPherson Station near the Darling Downs in December 1847, comprised 7 men in total. Leichhardt himself, the leader and naturalist, Arthur Hentig, a German artist and collector, Donald Stewart, a stockman, Henry Classen, a storeman, Thomas Hans, a cook, and 2 Aboriginal guides, whose names are recorded in some documents as Wumai and Billy, though their precise roles and full names are often inconsistently documented. Their combined experience was a blend of Leichhardt's scientific rigor and the practical bushcraft of his stockmen. The conditions they set out into were, even at the outset, formidable. The Australian summer was already asserting its dominance, bringing with it intense heat and the constant threat of water scarcity. Leichhardt's previous expedition had taught him the necessity of carrying ample provisions and a large complement of animals, but the sheer scale of this venture pushed the limits of what was practical. He intended to establish a chain of supply depots along his proposed route, a logistical challenge of immense proportions in a land where communication was non-existent beyond the range of a horseman. The plan was to follow the river systems inland, hoping to find a continuous watercourse that would lead them west, a strategy that had proven unreliable in previous explorations of the continent's interior. The records indicate Leichhardt's unwavering belief in his chosen path, a conviction that bordered on obstinacy, as noted by several of his contemporaries in their private correspondence. He was a man driven by scientific inquiry, but also by a profound desire for recognition, a combination that often clouded his judgment regarding the practicalities of survival in such an unforgiving landscape. His letters before departure spoke of the grandeur of the enterprise and the unparalleled opportunities for the inventory of the expedition stores, meticulously itemized in Leichhardt's journal entries and supply manifests, reveals a comprehensive, if perhaps overly optimistic, approach to provisioning. They carried a formidable array of equipment, designed to sustain them for at least 2 years in the wilderness. For navigation and scientific observation, Leichhardt had a sextant, a chronometer, a barometer, and several compasses, alongside a collection of specimen boxes, presses for botanical samples, and various instruments for geological survey. Ammunition for their rifles and fowling pieces was packed in considerable quantity, alongside spare parts for repairs. Tools included axes, shovels, picks, and a forge for blacksmithing work, indicating an intention for self-sufficiency far from any settlement. Trade goods, such as blankets, tobacco, and beads, were also included, intended for interactions with indigenous communities they might encounter. Food provisions were extensive: 2,700 pounds of flour, 300 pounds of salt meat, 200 pounds of sugar, 100 pounds of tea, and 50 pounds of salt. This was supplemented by a variety of dried fruits and vegetables, intended to ward off scurvy, a constant threat on long expeditions. Water strategy, however, remained the most critical and precarious aspect of their planning. Leichhardt intended to rely on natural waterholes, known as billabongs, and the seasonal flow of inland rivers. The dry season, which was well underway, presented a significant challenge to this approach. The sheer number of animals they brought with them was staggering: 50 bullocks, 20 mules, and 100 horses. These animals served multiple purposes. The bullocks were primarily intended as a moving larder, to be slaughtered for meat as needed, while the mules and horses carried the bulk of their equipment and provided transport for the men. The total weight of their stores and equipment, once loaded onto the animals, was estimated to be in excess of 10 tons. This required a slow, deliberate pace, averaging perhaps 10 to 15 miles a day under optimal conditions. Leichhardt's scientific goals extended beyond mere mapping. He aimed to collect and classify new species of flora and fauna, to record geological formations, and to document the natural history of the continent's interior. His last communication, dated April 3, 1848, from the Darling Downs, spoke of minor delays due to the difficulty of managing such a large herd of animals, but expressed confidence in their progress and the abundance of feed and water they had encountered thus far. He noted the excellent health of his party and the high spirits of the men, betraying no immediate sense of impending difficulty. The letter concluded with an optimistic outlook, detailing their intended route along the. Following their departure from the Darling Downs, the expedition moved steadily, if slowly, west and northwest. Leichhardt's final dispatch, penned on April 3, 1848, is the last reliable written record of their progress. In it, he described their position as being approximately 27 degrees 15 minutes south latitude and 149 degrees 30 minutes east longitude, on the western slopes of the Great Dividing Range, near the headwaters of the Maranoa River. He detailed the challenges of managing such a large complement of animals, particularly the bullocks, which required constant supervision to prevent them from straying. He noted the country was open and well-grassed, and water, while requiring careful management, was generally available in the riverbeds and lagoons. There were no indications of distress or significant hardship. The letter was carried back to settlement by a stockman who had accompanied them for the initial leg of the journey, ensuring its timely delivery. After this point, the trail becomes cold. There are no further direct communications, no journal entries, no official reports. The expedition simply continued its westward trajectory into the vast, unpopulated interior, and then, silence. The last confirmed sighting by European settlers occurred shortly after the dispatch of the letter, when a small party of stockmen encountered Leichhardt's expedition near the present-day town of Roma, Queensland. The stockmen reported the expedition to be in good order, though moving slowly due to the large number of animals. They exchanged pleasantries and parted ways, with Leichhardt reiterating his intention to push west towards the Barcoo River and beyond. This encounter, however, lacks the detailed documentation of Leichhardt's own letters, relying instead on later recollections. Subsequent to this, the expedition entered a region entirely devoid of European presence. The vastness of the territory they were entering, a landscape of arid plains, spinifex deserts, and intermittent river systems, was known for its extreme conditions. Temperatures could soar to over 40 degrees Celsius, 104 degrees Fahrenheit, in the shade during the day, plummeting significantly at night. Waterholes could be hundreds of miles apart, and the availability of feed for such a large number of animals was always a precarious matter. Leichhardt's previous expedition had survived similar conditions, but often through sheer endurance and a degree of fortune. The slow creep of silence began to generate concern in the colonial settlements by late 1849. When the expected return date passed without word, and no reports emerged from the western coast, the colonial authorities began to acknowledge the possibility of a catastrophe. The absence of any further communication, given Leichhardt's meticulous habits, was particularly troubling. The silence was not merely the absence of news, but the absence of any trace, which in such a vast and unforgiving environment, often spoke volumes. The sheer scale of the expedition, with its 150 animals, should have left a discernible. As the months stretched into years without any word from Leichhardt's expedition, the initial concern in the colonies deepened into widespread alarm. The vastness of the Australian continent, combined with the limited resources for search and rescue, meant that any recovery effort would be a monumental undertaking. The first official search expedition, led by Augustus Charles Gregory, a surveyor and explorer of considerable experience, was not launched until 1858, a full decade after Leichhardt's last communication. Gregory, funded by the colonial government, set out from Moreton Bay with a well-equipped party, his primary objective to follow Leichhardt's presumed route westward. His expedition meticulously surveyed a vast tract of land, following the Barcoo River into the arid interior. On June 21, 1858, Gregory's party made a significant discovery near the Barcoo River, approximately 24 degrees 35 minutes south latitude and 146 degrees 10 minutes east longitude. Carved into the bark of a large eucalypt tree, they found the distinct letter L, alongside the Roman numeral XVA. The L was widely interpreted as a marker left by Leichhardt, and the XVA was speculated to represent the 15th day of August, or perhaps the 15th year of the expedition, though the latter seemed improbable given the time elapsed. This L tree, as it became known, was a clear and unambiguous sign that Leichhardt had indeed reached this point. It was a moment of profound significance for Gregory's party, confirming their proximity to the lost explorer's path. However, despite an extensive search of the surrounding area, no other signs were found. There were no remnants of a camp, no discarded equipment, no graves, and crucially, no human remains. The ground around the tree offered no further clues. The harsh environment and the passage of 10 years had erased any lighter traces. Gregory's party continued their search further west, but the landscape yielded nothing more. He noted in his journal the immense challenges of searching in such an environment, the relentless heat, the scarcity of reliable water sources, and the sheer, overwhelming scale of the distances involved. His conclusions, meticulously documented, suggested that Leichhardt's party had likely perished somewhere beyond the L tree, succumbing to either thirst, starvation, or possibly conflict with indigenous inhabitants, though he found no direct evidence to support any specific cause. The absence of any significant expedition equipment or animal remains was particularly perplexing. A party of 150 animals should have left a substantial footprint, yet the land had swallowed them whole. The fell tree, while confirming Leichhardt's presence, only deepened the mystery of his ultimate fate, providing a tantalizing glimpse without offering a definitive answer. Gregory's search, while the fell tree found by Gregory in 1858 provided a fixed point, but no resolution. The colonial governments, spurred by public interest and the persistent mystery, funded further expeditions. Hovenden Healy, a pastoralist and explorer, led a search in 1852, focusing on the country between the Maranoa and Warrego rivers, but found no trace. John McDougall Stewart, another prominent explorer, conducted searches in 1859, pushing into the central deserts, but his efforts also yielded nothing concrete related to Leichhardt. The vastness of the continent simply swallowed the search parties, often leaving them as bewildered as the original expedition. Decades later, in 1880, a stockman named Andrew Hume claimed to have found a brass plate, allegedly inscribed with Ludwig Leichhardt, 1848. Hume stated he had received it from an Aboriginal man in the Great Sandy Desert. This Leichhardt plate sparked renewed excitement and a fresh wave of speculation. However, its authenticity was immediately questioned by experts and historians. The inscription was deemed crude, and Hume's account of its discovery changed several times. Despite a government-funded search led by Hume himself, which predictably found nothing, the plate was largely dismissed as a fabrication. It remains a curious footnote, illustrative of the desperate desire for answers rather than a genuine piece of evidence. Another Leichhardt tree was identified in 1865 by the relief expedition for Burke and Wills, near Cooper Creek, bearing the inscription L and a date. However, this marking was later attributed to the Burke and Wills expedition itself, as a marker for a cache of provisions, rather than a sign from Leichhardt. The persistent rumors and indigenous accounts, often collected years or decades after the event, spoke of a party of white men and their animals perishing in the desert, or being killed in skirmishes. These accounts, while compelling in their narrative, lacked the specific details, locations, or corroborating evidence necessary for them to be considered definitive. The sheer scale of the search efforts over several decades, involving some of the most experienced bushmen and explorers of the era, underscores the profound enigma of Leichhardt's disappearance. The artifacts that did emerge, the felled tree, the controversial plate, were isolated, ambiguous, and offered no clear, continuous trail. Each discovery raised more questions than it answered, serving only to highlight the profound silence that followed Leichhardt's final dispatch. The gradual fading of hope for survivors was replaced by a grim acceptance that the Australian interior had The felled tree, discovered by Gregory in 1858, remains the most concrete, undisputed piece of evidence of Leichhardt's progress. Its location, near the Barcoo River, confirmed that the expedition had penetrated deep into the interior, roughly 500 miles west of their last known communication point. Yet, what the felled tree did not tell us is as significant as what it did. It marked a presence, but offered no indication of direction, no message of distress, no hint of their intentions beyond that specific date. The absence of further markers, of subsequent camps, of discarded equipment, or of any graves in the vicinity of the tree, is profoundly perplexing. Such a large party, with 150 animals, would have left a substantial trail, yet the land around the felled tree was empty. This suggests a rapid and comprehensive disappearance, rather than a slow, arduous decline. The implications of finding so little are stark. Did the expedition perish quickly, perhaps in a sudden, catastrophic event such as a flash flood in a dry riverbed, or a prolonged period of extreme drought that exhausted all water sources? Did they split up, with individuals or smaller groups meeting separate fates? The harshness of the environment, with its extreme temperatures, scarcity of water, and vast, featureless plains, stands as a primary and undeniable factor in any assessment of their fate. The Australian outback is a landscape that can erase all but the most durable traces. The possibility of conflict with indigenous groups, while often speculated upon in colonial narratives, lacks any direct, corroborating evidence. No specific battle sites, no recovered weapons, no detailed indigenous accounts of such a large-scale confrontation have ever been definitively linked to Leichhardt's party. Furthermore, the absence of any significant animal remains is particularly puzzling. Even if the men perished, the bullocks, mules, and horses, numbering 150, should have left bones or other durable evidence, especially if they died from thirst or starvation in a concentrated area. The slow decay of organic materials in the arid environment, while a factor, does not fully account for the complete lack of trace. The Leichhardt tree stands as a monument not to discovery, but to an enduring question, a solitary signpost in a vast, silent wilderness. It marks the edge of the known, beyond which lies only conjecture and the profound, unyielding mystery of their final days. There is no definitive last camp, no final resting place identified for any. After more than a century and a half of inquiry, the historical record remains stubbornly silent on the ultimate fate of Ludwig Leichhardt and his expedition. 7 men, 50 bullocks, 20 mules, and 100 horses vanished without leaving a single verifiable human remain, a significant piece of equipment, or a definitive campsite. The vastness of the Australian continent swallowed them whole, leaving behind only a single marked tree as a testament to their passage. The silence of the landscape, so profound and absolute, continues to defy explanation. What precisely occurred after the felled tree was carved remains unknown.